Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 50th episode of the Spiritual Brainstorm. In this episode, I'd like to discuss an idea that I've already touched upon, but maybe try to dig in a little deeper. And it's on, I would call it like the natural selection of experience or the natural selection of thought. Basically, the topic is um, the big debate between whether reality is pre existing. So there's something that is already there. It's just hidden to our knowledge. And we discover or uncover it. Uncover it. So it's like basically, the dinosaurs, the fossils hidden in the ground, and you dig into the earth, deep into the earth until you find the skeleton. Um, and so you're uncovering something that was already there. And so there's a pre existing reality, and we're just gradually coming to grips with it, but we're not actually creating anything. It's something that's pre existing. And that is the assumption that materialist science makes, is that the universe and the earth everything was always functioning the way it is functioning now, gravity, all of it. And it's just that before people didn't know, so they thought that these phenomenons were magic. And any account of people being able to fly or any of these things are actually myths or stories, but they were never part of our reality, or it was just stories that people told because since they didn't understand it, they thought it was magic. Now, the other more radical kind of way of understanding reality is that reality is created via the observer at every single moment of the present and recreated. Now, it's always a little difficult to sort of picture how that looks like. But basically, what I would say is start with inheritance. And there's this basically, it's as if there was this one consciousness that incarnated itself into the most tiniest and most simple thing, like a wave, for instance, or light. And then that became a photon. And then that became subparticles and the atom, etc., until it becomes something very sophisticated. And basically, we have inherited all of it. Um, we know this, that we basically inherit the vision of the world from our parents or our society. We don't, no human actually was ever born into a world that was void of any social construct, any idea about how the world worked. And every human sort of had that idea from their parent, and their parent had it from their parent. And so um, there's this inheritance of the world you live in, and then you add to it or you modify it slightly with your life experience. And then your progeny inherits the changes that you've made to what you've inherited. And so maybe you were here, maybe at some point you were a devout Catholic, you thought the world was created in 7 days. And at some point you were convinced by materialist scientists, and now you lead your children a different vision of the world. And this creation there has to be some rules for how it's created. Obviously, there's never a definite break in reality. Like, where nobody, to my knowledge at least, unless it's people that have just like sort of jumped and broken, linear time space, and jumped ahead, their consciousness jumped ahead to some parallel different reality, where like maybe the masters like Buddha or whatever experienced that kind of break in this gradual shift in how reality sort of looks like. But most people see this as a gradual kind of process of evolving, not a jump forward where you're sort of teleported into the future. And so, you see, it's like you don't see the iPhone 12, you don't experience the iPhone 12 before having experienced every single iPhone iteration before that one, that version. And it's the same for our reality. Like, um, first you have to have Newton and his theory of gravity before Einstein comes in with his theory of relativity. There's an order to how the vision of reality sort of evolves, and the rules for creation and what how the way the observer creates. That's probably the most important thing to sort of uncover, or the biggest mystery in my mind. In the pre-existing model, it's much easier. You don't even have to ask any of these questions, because you're not creating anything. You're just discovering or uncovering something that was already there. And then normally the way you do it is, when you uncover it, because of the assumptions behind materialist science, it also gives you the answer of why it's there or how it got there, because it's within the materialist science dogma and paradigm, which means it had to be there via cause and effect, linear time space. All of these assumptions are behind it. And so you cannot uncover things that are outside of what you already believe. And you're limited in that regard. Now, I'm doing this video as a response to Rupert Sheldrake and Vernon dialogues. They were discussing on Rupert Sheldrake's channel about pseudoscience, and the fact that there is an upsurge in pseudoscience and people that are pretending to be scientific and all these conspiracy theories and everything. And I was just wondering why. Why is this such an issue today? And I thought maybe it's linked to this vision of reality. If if we decide that basically reality is shaped by consciousness and the observer, and then we create our reality collectively at every single point in time, and every part of the reality, be it animals, plants, rocks, all of these are consciousnesses which have a certain vision of the world and have integrated the sort of some sort of rules for how to navigate into reality. And there's a consensus that is reached between all of them at some level about a shared common reality or common creation, common reality. Like, for instance, when a lion eats a gazelle, or one plant eats another plant, or when a rock crushes a plant, what happens? They all have to sort of agree, basically, how they're supposed to interact and how they're supposed to modify the reality in order and what experience they're supposed to have. Now, for humans, and I'm wondering if this is how it works. So this is the mystery I'm trying to solve, how it actually works in practice. Every time you have a thought, of course, that doesn't translate into an experience necessarily. I mean, for instance, many people think of having superpowers and they don't have superpowers necessarily. But why? Why is it that some thoughts and some ideas actually do shape reality and have an influence, and others don't? What's the factor that decides whether Newton's gravity is the idea that people integrate, or whether it's Darwin's theory of evolution, or whether it's the Christian version of creationism. Why is one idea taken up? Why does it survive? Why do you find evidence for certain ideas and not for others? And for all creators, if we create the reality, then why do we find proofs for some things, like, for instance, digging for dinosaurs and finding some evidence for the theory of evolution? And why do you not find as much evidence for other things? And some people just say, some people, especially in the spiritual realm, think it's just a matter of majority, like a kind of majority rule. Like if like 90% of people are materialists, then if only 10% believe that aliens created humans and that aliens exist and are real, then they're kind of like filtered out of our consciousness bubble. Like we're on this planet and there is like a veil, an energetic veil that's created around it, where you have all these aliens flying around in their saucers, but they can't actually penetrate that bubble of, let's say it's like a barrier, a belief barrier, where we self isolate in a materialist science kind of dogma. There is something to that theory, but I think it's a little bit different. That is, the rules here are that you are allowed to experience whatever you want so long as it doesn't interfere with other people's beliefs and what experiences they want to have. So the easiest example is like these people that levitate, these Buddhist monks. They're supposed to like be levitating out in the Himalayas in their temples. Um, they can do that if they are alone, or if the people surrounding them are people that believe that levitation is something possible. But if there is anyone that sort of shows up uninvited and looks at that, then either they have to be looking at it from a point of view where they would think it's an optical illusion, or that there's a trick, like for instance, like there's a stick here holding him to the ground or something, or that and any kind of explanation that fits with their um, belief structure and doesn't violate it. And if there is, of course, if at some level they have doubt about their beliefs and they're open to these kind of different kind of experiences or whatever, they're already questioning materialist science and they're in a kind of a exploratory phase, willing to shift their beliefs, then maybe that is an experience that they've actually called into their reality, and then it's compatible. But even like if you have one person that tries to film this, then the actual film will, and if it's shared, for instance, on social media, it will have to be a film where people can say, oh, but it's been photoshopped or whatever, because the rule is you cannot interfere with other people's beliefs. Everybody is allowed to experience their beliefs as a kind of a mirror, like a feedback loop in this reality. And the universe attracts together people that have beliefs that are opposing, or that enables you or somebody else to have an experience which allows you to, like, basically say, do I still agree with those beliefs? Do I still, are these beliefs about reality still something that I like or not? And every time it gives you the opportunity of validating your beliefs, saying, great, I like them, I want to keep those beliefs, or to change them. So, for instance, if you think that all black people are violent and robbers and rapists and whatever, you're calling that belief into your reality. And suddenly, I mean, at some point, um, you have it's about the universe saying, are you still okay with that belief? Are you sure you still want to bring into your reality those kinds of people? And they, of course, on the other side, if there's a person on the other side, playing the role of the violent person, they're also validating their own beliefs. Like white people, for instance, are all thieves that live in their privileged community, in their very expensive villas, and they're oppressing us and whatever. And all of those are actually, so the beliefs are held on both sides, and they're mutually reinforcing each other. And every time, every single moment of your life, you have the choice of keeping to validate those beliefs or to move on to other beliefs. And so that explains why, for instance, you have two neighbors with the same house, very rich and with the same sports car, and one gets robbed and the other doesn't get robbed. Why? Why does one get robbed and the other doesn't? And that's obviously to do with beliefs. That's the only thing that actually differentiates them, is that one probably has a belief about the fact that he feels remorse for being so rich, and he feels guilty about accumulating so much wealth. Somewhere in the subconscious, in his subconscious mind, feels guilty about something. And so because he doesn't see that, then the universe brings into his experience like the experience of theft, of being robbed, so that he can actually feel that feeling that he's repressing. That's one way of seeing it as well. Is like the beliefs that you hold about yourself also. Um, Even things that you don't know about yourself, that you think, for instance, you have no remorse, you think you deserve the great villa, but somewhere in your subconscious you're thinking, my god, maybe I'm robbing somebody else from having that experience or whatever. And then you call into your experience, of course, something that is going to bring those subconscious feelings to the fore. Or you can keep on ignoring them, and then it keeps on coming back and coming back and coming back. But if you're, for instance, in your big villa and you feel completely content that you deserve that money because, for whatever reason, either because you just think it's the way it should be, because that's the experience you want to have, and that's totally fine, of course, because in this universe, ultimately, if we all believe that we deserve this kind of experience, if we all wanted that experience on all levels of reality, then I don't see any reason why it shouldn't happen. But that's, of course, a very radical view, and that would mean that we have to sort of abandon our belief system of materialist science, which is already a layer which tells us, kind of, which limits us and says, no, it's not possible for blah, 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 blah reasons. And breaking very radically with inheritance of certain beliefs, like, for instance, limited resources and all of these things. In the universe, the energy is infinite. It's our power to harness it, which is limited, and that's limited by our own consciousness. But still, so that's one set of rules of how you sort of call something into your reality. But how about creative thoughts, like, for instance, Newton's gravity and all these things? Like, what ideas, or evolution, which ideas actually get selected? And in my view, maybe the way that it happens is, let's say this is your timeline with the past, the present, and the future. And of course, there's only an eternal present in which all of this exists at once, but let's say that from an eternal present, you are in a certain state of consciousness. You've reached a certain state of consciousness and beliefs, which attach you to a certain reality where all of these things are um, are happening at once. So the future is already existing from that level of consciousness and beliefs. And for instance, imagine you are 18 and you believe that AI will take over the world and it's going to be apocalypse because it's the 1980s and there's going to soon be a nuclear war. Well, that future is already there. So there's the mushroom cloud. Humanity is extinct. And because that's your level of consciousness and beliefs at that eternal present moment. But then you grow up and you're like 28 now, and your consciousness and beliefs have evolved, and so you're now on a different eternal present. And what is what has changed fundamentally is not time has not really gone by, but your consciousness and your beliefs have evolved, and that shifts you, puts you on a totally different timeline where now you believe in the possibility of peace. And so it's as if you have um, gradually shifted, by shifting your consciousness and your beliefs, you've actually shifted through millions and millions of parallel realities here, where now you don't need to experience the mushroom cloud and there is peace. Is that how you? I don't even know how you draw that sign peace anymore. Anyway, um, yeah, and so and that repeats. That process repeats. But so let's say that any idea that anybody has about reality um, creates instantly all the past, all the present, and all the future, where that idea expresses itself. And let's say that you believe in an end of the world apocalypse where we all destroy ourselves. Well, obviously, that future is a dead end and doesn't tie very nicely with the fact that, the universe wants to experience its infinite nature. And so it's like it won't be selected. Let's say it won't be, which is why I called my video a natural selection of experiences or of thought. Is that there's also a sort of a natural selection of ideas about um, what reality is, what we're doing here, all of these things. Why? Well, because and that's what explains basically that some ideas make the cut or not. And here I'm saying, like, for instance, this is the explanation of why evolution, for instance, in um, the Darwinian vision of evolution took over from the creationist vision. Is because when Darwin thought of evolution, it automatically created past, present, future timeline where that idea was true and where it existed, as opposed to one where everybody still believed in creationism. And it's simply that the timeline where that idea existed was longer or enabled us to experience um, a future, whereas the one with creationism would probably all be silly and destroy ourselves for with fundamentalist and fundamentalist kind of war with other religions that were equally fundamentalist about what we're doing here, and it's just like a dead end basically. And so there's this kind of natural selection of ideas which plays out at a level that we don't really understand, I think. And ultimately, anything that enters into your experience from your eternal present, then you can. This is what's really radical about it, is that you can sort of be sure that it is perfect. Why? Because it has been pre-selected already through a process where there is no time and everything is instant and everything is created instantly. And where if it enters into your eternal present moment, it means that it leads to infinity. It is like as if like this timeline is the one with evolution, and that allows for shifting to yet another timeline where, of course, this is the dead end of materialist science, that allows you to evolve yet further. And this is like the more spiritual beliefs and quantum realization about reality. And that also comes to a dead end. And then you shift to yet another timeline where we are all kind of, I don't know, wispy balls of energy that just create universes. And that also is a dead end at some point. And you shift to yet another level of understanding, and so on into infinity. Um, in terms of visions of the world, in terms of consciousness, in terms of beliefs. But there's still a sort of selection process and mechanism for filtering what beliefs become part of your experience and which ones are just beliefs that you'll never really get to experience. um, yeah, and so I think that's why basically you don't see people flying around and having superpowers, because ultimately this selection process happens for every single idea that is spewed out by all of humanity at every single second. And it's as if, from all those ideas, 7 billion universes are created instantly, with those ideas being present, creating all the past, present, and future of the implications of those ideas, where it might lead us, and only those that lead us towards a point where we can evolve further and grow our consciousness, is what is brought into our experience. And now, when I'm saying perfect, it's a very radical kind of perfection. It also means that your idea and your feeling of imperfection about reality, and the fact that it's not the perfect reality, is part of that perfection. And that's really hard to understand. And that's why where the dualities and the opposites kind of collapse on each other. It's your judgment about reality being imperfect is perfect, in the sense that that is exactly the kind of feeling that you may have at that point, which will allow you to grow and evolve. And if at some point you believe that there's nothing to change, that everything is perfect, then that is also perfect. That is also that's maybe the moment where you are like that flower that blooms and that is beautiful, and you're just there. You're just beautiful and you just shine. And then at a certain point, again, you'll be disappointed. You want to evolve, and you'll again feel that things are imperfect. But that's all part of the perfection. And so you can't beat this, basically. From our point of view as being inside the experience, um, we obviously have some margin of maneuver over what we want to experience in our reality. Like, I can choose whether I'm can take a vanilla ice cream or a chocolate ice cream, and plenty of other choices. But the overall experience, still, like the fact of being incarnated, the things that happen around the world, coronavirus, some big events, some big things, all of these things are probably called in. Even the ideas that emerge, even the way that we are gradually awakening to a higher understanding of spirituality and rekindling with spirituality and our spiritual selves, the way that it's happening is also something that has been selected through this process. It's like this butterfly effect, where basically, even like, for instance, a lion eating a gazelle, for instance, a lion eating a gazelle, or not eating a gazelle, or not catching it, that action reverberates infinitely into the future and has infinite amount of consequences on the future. Like, for instance, if that lion doesn't eat the gazelle, then that starves. That lion could have killed some, if he actually managed to catch the gazelle, then he could have then survived and eaten a African emperor, which him being eaten, then somebody else would take his place, and that person would have been weak, and he would sell slaves to the white people. And so you can see that, like, any action, anything, even a fly, for instance, that you're attempting to kill, that action has reverberates infinitely, has infinite repercussions into the future. And and there is a consciousness or a level in which you can see that, you can perceive that, and you can say, okay, let's bring that fly into, let's say, Martin's experience, because he's gonna lose 3 seconds chasing it, and he's gonna avoid being hit by a bus. All of these things um, can be brought to the fore at some level of consciousness. You can be actually made aware of those things. And reaching that level of consciousness, you have to get rid of so many beliefs and limitations and limited beliefs and judgments also, because your job at that point is just for creation to exist for its own sake and making sure that it sort of thrives and grows. You're not interested in the micromanagement of, oh, the poor fly, or oh, the poor gazelle, or oh, the poor lion, or the poor this. You're just there to allow consciousness to have a playground in experiencing itself, which grows and grows and grows and grows more and more and more and more. And that is ultimately what I think we're here to do. That is our training here as being in this reality, is because creating from this 3D reality is extremely difficult, and getting rid of judgment is extremely difficult, and being accepting of the fact that our judgment is also perfect in some way, actually, or can be perfect, and not being judgmental about our judgment, um, and accepting it also for what it is, that is all part of this transcendence. And it's so difficult to accept. um, Accepting it, your own perfectness, that is, it's almost as if it's the same as loving yourself unconditionally, and that is one of the most crazy and difficult things to achieve. um, Either unconditional love for yourself or for the entire creation, everything that you see, basically, and that's, both are equally difficult. Yeah, and so basically, because there's this infinite reverberation into the future, then, you know, it's as if from our past we've created, like, when you hear people speaking about angels, speaking about chakras, speaking about all these things, it's again the same debate. Were those things, chakras and angels, were they pre-existing, or did we create them at some point in the past, as some people had the idea that these things existed, and then we've created them, and now we get to experience them because that way of understanding and structuring our spiritual reality and the energetic body makes sense, because it was selected, from an evolution point of view, was selected as ideas or ways of structuring energy, which will actually enable us to grow our consciousness in the future, and structures the universe and the different energies and interaction of energies between each other in a way which is harmonious, and allows for a richer and greater expansion and bigger experience, or were those things pre-existing? And that's something that the spiritual community has difficulty in acknowledging. Like, they'll say, yeah, it's the observer that creates uh, the reality. Okay, but that means that you create your chakras and you create angels just as much as you create materialist science. Because if you believe that angels and chakras are the reality and materialist science is actually bogus, then you're contradicting yourself, because you're saying that this is pre-existing, and we're only uncovering it, basically uncovering something that was already there. And that means you're falling into the materialist science vision, basically, by saying that. Whereas what I think is that there's actually no form to infinity, and all of these, any and all ideas that infinity thinks about itself as what form it gives itself, those ideas are then experienced instantly. The implication of those ideas across a linear time, like from the very beginning of that idea to the ultimate future where it leads, is created instantly, and then whether you get to experience it all the way into the 3D depends on um, if that idea actually helps you, um, let's say, grow from that limited state of consciousness back to an infinite kind of level of consciousness and unity. And I don't know if that's clear. And one other thing that is quite radical also is that creation happens at every single point in time, which means that the people that have first coined the term angels have created angels. But obviously something else has created us as well by having the thought of, hey, maybe there are some human being creatures that, so it's like if angels created us via a thought and we created angels. And within infinity, that is absolutely normal because every idea has to loop back on itself. Everything is the chicken and the egg, basically. And it's as if the chicken creates the egg and the egg creates the chicken in a kind of a sort of a feedback loop. You see? So the chicken thinks, how did I ever come to exist? I must have come from an egg. And then the egg says, hey, what am I going to become? That's strange. Oh, maybe I'm going to become a chicken. And so those thoughts and ideas about what one, where do I come from, and the other, what will I become, actually feed on each other until they become more and more and more and more precise and specific. And that's the experience that we've had in our reality, is at first like we've basically been created by God instantly, then there's material science, then there's spirituality that complexifies the whole thing. And if you've looked at my previous video, like the very very early video that I've done on creationism versus evolution, you understand that basically we're integrating more and more and more and more truths about how we are actually we managed to arrive to this point. Where do we come from? And the more we integrate that, the more we're kind of a seed from which more and more realities can be created, because we're not here to invalidate the legitimacy of one or another story about our origins. It's like invalidating one or another roots of a plant, like saying this root of the plant is now rotten and is no longer there, so it never existed. No, 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 no. It was an actual timeline that existed, an experience that is valid. So you see that everything creates everything, and so angels create humans just as much as humans create angels. And it's almost like, I'd like to give the example of music, for instance, because it's much easier. It's as if you had these chaotic sounds everywhere, and they didn't know how to interact with each other. And it's as if, this idea of the piano and ordering the notes in such a way that they sound together in a harmonious way comes together instantly, like that idea of the focus effect of a camera, where the image comes into focus all at the same time. And this analogy is very useful, because if you imagine like infinity as being one big picture, and everything comes into focus at the same time. So that means past, present, and future become more and more clear at the same time. So the more we know about ourselves, the more we understand what angels are, and the more that happens, and the more angels can actually remember how they came to become angels, and that helps us, and vice versa. Like there's this back and forth kind of mechanism. And you hear that a lot. Like you hear channelers saying that, these ETs, they're saying, we are you in the future. And it's very hard to understand how that actually works. um, So going back to the analogy of the piano, it's as if every single note was kind of thinking, okay, I'm this note, and but how can I interact with this note in a harmonious way? And this note thinks the same. Okay, I'm this note, but how can I interact harmoniously with this one? And so they mutually adjust their frequency. This frequency basically influences this one, and this one influences that one, and until they come to a sort of a resonance or a consonance. And it's the same with, these metronomes, for instance, that come into sync spontaneously. For instance, there are videos that I've shared about that. Like, you put metronomes on metronomes are those things that give the beat. They swing back and forth like this, and you put several. And even if they're out of sync, at some point they'll just come into sync naturally by influencing each other mutually. And it's the same way that our reality basically functions in my mind, is that infinity from every single point spews out ideas and actions and all those things. And what gets experienced in one realm is basically is always perfect, because it's always linked to every single other point of the universe and of the experience and of time and of everything. um, Yeah, and so it's quite a radical kind of thought, which means basically that it could have been something else besides chakras and angels. It's like angels are a note that you've arbitrarily gave it a name to, like G. Let's say that's G, but it could have been, I don't know, X. Doesn't really matter. What matters is what vibration it is and how it resonates with the other notes, how it's related to the other notes. So angels are related to us in a certain way because of the frequency that they have and our frequency that we have. And the interaction between our frequency and their frequency gives something which we translate as positive or love or advice, or I don't know, whatever you want to call it, or assistance or whatever. But ultimately, it's just a way to give a form to something that is formless, and bring it into a 3D experience, which can be experienced basically and is not abstract. You see, just like, for instance, you can observe the effect that playing the G and the C, for instance, note together have on a monitor, like that monitors waves, but that doesn't give you the actual experience of what that sounds like for your body, for instance, for your ears. Is it pleasant, not pleasant? Is it harmonious, not harmonious? How does it feel? That's what this world is about. It's about how do all of these ideas that we've created feel, and our role in feeling them helps every other part of the universe basically, because it's as if, like these aliens saying, oh, the humans have just felt the experience of this idea of AI, for instance, taking over the world, and it's not very pleasant. Oh, wow, very interesting, and that's going to affect our reality. And you know I mean, I don't know if that's clear, but anyways, sorry for being so long-winded. It's a very, very complex topic, but just to say that the takeaway is that um, there is a kind of a selection process for the ideas that we get to experience, the timing for their appearance, which explains why we don't have this Tesla miracle free energy yet. Oops, free energy inner. Um, Simply because, in my mind, there is a reality where that has, like, where Tesla's ideas were not censored, and where probably we've done a mess. We've used them very irresponsibly, given our state of consciousness, and mutually destroyed each other or polluted the planet beyond repair. And we need to experience 100 years of pollution and scarcity in order to use free energy in a responsible way when it actually pops up. And I think it was the author Victor Hugo who said, "There's nothing more powerful than an idea whose time whose time has come." Like democracy, for instance. Like imagine you go 10,000 years ago and you go to like one of these ancient tribes, and you start explaining the principle of democracy. How do you think they would have reacted? How do you think they would have put that into practice? Do you think, or would have laughed in your face and thrown a few sticks at you, or pummeled you to death? And so that's the whole thing. And I guess many of these spiritual teachers are wise enough to have these ideas flow through them and let something higher sort of take control. And I guess that's the experience many people face, like experience when they write something, they write a book or they write an idea that they feel is arriving at the right time, at the right moment, at the right place. And suddenly, like millions of people read it and they're like, wow, it's a success. Because it's an idea that has been selected through this kind of process where there is a knowledge of the impact it's going to have in the future, as all of this is created instantly, and therefore it's the right time for that idea to emerge and be experienced in 3D, in our limited perception here of the world, because it will serve the growth, it will serve the purpose of the evolution of consciousness on this planet. And some other ideas, they're just never heard, never sold. They're just sitting on a bookshelf in some random obscure library shelf. Nobody reads them. And that's also for the best. And it's just the way it is, because you have to let go of, that's the whole idea behind letting go of the result, is that perhaps your idea, your book, its time was didn't come, and it was maybe the right time for you to write it at that point, but it'll be rediscovered 50 years from now, that book, and be read, and that was the right time. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't have written it. It's just that it wasn't the right time for that to be discovered, and it was already the best moment it should have been discovered is 50 years later. And that's just the way it is. And accepting that, and totally, and it's difficult from our human perspective, of course, because we want results immediately. We want to have the right ideas arrive at the right time. But sometimes that's just the way it is. And I think Buckminster Fuller, for instance, who invented the geodesic domes structures and really advanced the sacred geometry, um, I think he had a very spiritual experience at some point where he wanted to commit suicide, and heard that he was like surrounded by white light, and it said, "You belong to the universe, and you need to develop your ideas, and you will never know the meaning or the importance of your work." But just rest assured that it is important, but you don't need to know about the ins and outs of, the consequences of what you're going to create. And that is something that is really difficult for us humans to do, is this concept of planting a tree where you won't eat the fruits of that tree, and you just kind of leave it up to the universe, saying, um, as a human, the best thing I can do is spew out ideas. That's what makes me different from an animal. That's what I'm here for. It's have ideas, like see problems, confront challenges, and try to find ideas and solutions to those problems. And think, and of course, all the other things, of course, like enjoy your family, take care of your kids. But fundamentally, what we're doing is we are creators. That's the difference between us and animals or plants. We are meant to create. We are creators, but we're not meant to necessarily have this. obsessive control over the end result of our creations, and whether they are the right creations or not, because there is a selection process for what sort of germinates, which ideas germinate and which don't. um, that's beyond our control, I think, at least. So happy to hear your thoughts about this, and see you in the next video.